What if the man buying toy trains from your shop was secretly selling national secrets? The year is 1957. The hum of fluorescent lights is still a distant dream for most American businesses. In downtown New York, specifically in the quaint, bustling neighborhood of Greenwich Village, a different kind of light spills from the windows of Frank's fine toys. Not the harsh glare of modern commerce, but the warm, inviting glow of carefully arranged display cases, showcasing miniature worlds, intricate clockwork wonders, and the timeless magic of childhood. Inside, the air hums with the gentle tick-tock of wind-up animals, the distant, almost musical clatter of a model train set on a test track in the back, and the comforting scent of wood, paint, and new plastic. Frank, the shop owner, a man whose hands were as adept at fixing a broken toy soldier as they were at balancing ledgers, was in his element. He wasn't a man who sought adventure. Adventure, for Frank, was a new shipment of German-made Mechlin trains or the excited squeal of a child finding their perfect teddy bear. He was a creature of routine, of order, of the small, predictable joys of life in post-war America. He knew his customers, he knew his inventory, and he knew the quiet pulse of his neighborhood. He was, to all appearances, just another ordinary American living an ordinary life, selling toys. It happened on a Tuesday, mid-afternoon, the kind of Tuesday where the city outside hummed with a low, unhurried rhythm and the shop was quiet, save for the gentle ticking. The bell above the door chimed softly. Frank looked up, expecting Mrs. Henderson from down the street perhaps, or a tourist wandering in from 6th Avenue. Instead, a man stood in the doorway. He was unremarkable, that was Frank's first thought. Not tall, not short, not heavy, not thin. His clothes were neat, a dark overcoat despite the mild weather, a fedora pulled low, but nothing expensive, nothing flashy. He carried an old leather briefcase, worn but clean. His face was a blank canvas, no strong features, no obvious expressions. He could have been anyone, he could have been no one. He was a man designed to disappear into a crowd, even a small crowd like the one Frank expected later that afternoon. "May I help you?" Frank asked, his voice friendly, practiced. The man didn't respond immediately. His gaze swept the shop, not with curiosity but with a strangely clinical assessment. It lingered for a fraction of a second on the display of model airplanes, then moved to the dollhouses, then the train sets. His eyes were a startlingly pale blue, almost colorless, and they seemed to absorb everything without betraying a single thought. "I'm looking for a specific item," the man said, his voice flat, devoid of accent, but also devoid of any warmth. It was the voice of a man who chose his words with extreme care. "Of course," Frank replied, stepping out from behind the counter. "What are you looking for?" "The microdot viewing kit," the man stated. Frank blinked. "The what now?" He prided himself on knowing every item in his shop, every obscure part number, every new gadget. He had no microdot viewing kit. That sounded like something out of a pulp fiction novel, not a toy shop. The man's pale eyes narrowed just a fraction. "The high-magnification toy microscope with the special illumination feature," he corrected himself, the words delivered like a rehearsed line. "For examining very small prints on paper." Ah, Frank understood. He led the man to a glass case near the back, past rows of model cars and lead soldiers. "You mean this, sir?" He pointed to a German-made toy microscope. It was an exceptionally good one, even for a toy. It had several lenses, a small mirror for external light, and even a tiny battery-powered lamp for viewing in dim conditions. It was popular with serious young hobbyists, budding scientists. The man barely glanced at it. "Yes, that." His finger, surprisingly long and slender, tapped the glass. "And the specific model train locomotive, the Class E4489, number 96, the green one." Now Frank was truly puzzled. The microscope was one thing, but the train. The Mechlin Class E4489, number 96, was a beautiful dark green electric locomotive. It was a collector's item, really, not just a toy. And it was expensive. No child would ever be given it to play with. This man, however, seemed to know exactly what he wanted, down to the serial number. Frank carefully retrieved both items. He placed them on the counter. The microscope felt light, innocent. The train, heavy, solid, a masterpiece of miniature engineering. "That will be $65, sir," Frank said, a standard price for such quality. In 1957, $65 was a substantial sum. It was a week's wages for many. The man reached into his briefcase. He didn't pull out a wallet. He pulled out a small, worn leather pouch. From it, he extracted 2 coins. Not dimes, not quarters, not even a $50 bill. He placed them on the polished oak counter. 2 gold coins, real gold, old, very old. Frank stared. These weren't American currency. They looked like Roman coins or ancient European. He picked one up gingerly. It felt heavy, cool, substantial. The relief etched into the gold depicted an emperor's profile, worn smooth by centuries, yet undeniably precious. "These are quite old," Frank managed, his voice a little strained. "And not legal tender here, sir." The man's pale eyes met Frank's. There was no apology, no explanation, just a cool, unwavering stare. "They are worth far more than the requested $65. Consider the difference. A premium for your discretion." His voice was still flat, but a subtle emphasis on discretion hung in the air, a faint, almost imperceptible warning. Frank, a man who prided himself on his honesty and his straightforward dealings, felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. A premium for discretion. For selling a toy microscope and a model train. It was absurd. It was unsettling. It was. "Wrong," he swallowed. "Sir, I can't accept these. I can only accept US dollars." The man leaned forward just slightly. His voice dropped to a near whisper, though there was no one else in the shop. "Then perhaps you can make an exception. Or," he paused, and for the first time Frank saw something flicker in those pale eyes, something that wasn't blankness but a cold, hard glint. "Perhaps I will take my business elsewhere, but I must have these items." Frank was no fool. He had served in the war, seen things, understood the subtle dance of human intention. This wasn't a request, it was an insistence. And the threat, though unspoken, was palpable. He looked at the gleaming gold coins, then at the man's unyielding face, then at the innocent toy microscope and the miniature locomotive. Frank, a meticulous record keeper by nature, found himself sketching the man's face from memory in his ledger, alongside a note about the gold coins. It was a crude drawing, but it captured the blankness, the piercing gaze. He felt a strange compulsion to document, to remember, to understand. He was a man who believed in the tangible, the observable. This customer was a ghost, leaving only a trail of gold and unanswered questions. A week later, the bell chimed again. Frank looked up. His heart gave a jolt. It was HIM. The same dark overcoat, the same fedora, the same worn briefcase, and the same blank, unremarkable face. Frank felt a surge of something cold and unfamiliar, a mix of fear and a strange, almost morbid curiosity. He stood a little straighter, his hands clenching subtly under the counter. The man walked directly to the display case where the model planes were kept. His pale eyes scanned the selection. "The Messerschmitt Bf 109, he stated, his voice as flat as before. "The precise one, 72 scale model, with the retractable landing gear." Frank felt a fresh wave of unease. The Messerschmitt was a German fighter plane from World War II. An iconic model, yes, but again, a highly detailed collector's piece, not a child's toy. And the man's precision, retractable landing gear was unnervingly specific. As if it mattered. He retrieved the model plane. It was a beautiful piece, intricate, fragile. "That will be $25, sir," Frank said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his stomach. Again the leather pouch. Again not US currency. This time it was a silver coin larger than $1 with an unfamiliar crest. It looked old, European. Frank recognized it now. These weren't random old coins. These were specific. They had the heft and patina of genuine historical artifacts. "This is a thaler, a German coin from the 18th century, Frank said, trying to keep his voice neutral. He was testing the waters. The man's gaze didn't waver. "Indeed," he replied. "It is worth more than the asking price. Consider it paid." Frank didn't argue this time. He took the thaler, his fingers closing around the cold metal. He placed it carefully beside the gold coins in his safe, a growing collection of evidence of a clandestine operation that defied all logic. He watched the man leave, the bell chiming softly behind him. As the door closed, Frank looked at the model plane lying innocently on his counter, a German fighter. A few weeks ago, a German train and a German microscope. Was there a pattern, German engineering, but for what purpose? Frank was a veteran of World War II. He had seen the grim realities of conflict. He knew the difference between a child's game and the machinery of war. These weren't just toys. They were too specific, too expensive, purchased with too much cold precision. And the payments, the ancient, valuable coins, screamed of resources beyond the ordinary. He started keeping a more detailed record. Dates, times, items purchased, descriptions of the man. He called him Mr. X in his notes. He bought a small, discreet camera, a Minox sub-miniature spy camera that was, ironically, itself a tool of espionage. He kept it hidden under the counter. He didn't know why exactly, but he had a growing, horrifying suspicion that he might need proof. Proof of what? He didn't know that either. But the gut feeling, the soldier's instinct that something was fundamentally wrong, only grew stronger with each visit. His normal life was dissolving. He'd find himself staring out the window, looking for Mr. X. He'd scrutinize every customer, every face. He'd jump at the sound of the bell. His wife, Martha, noticed his distraction. "Frank, you all right, honey?" she'd ask, her brow furrowed with concern. "You're jumpier than a cat on a hot tin roof. And what's with all these strange coins in the safe?" Frank would always wave her off with a vague explanation. "Just a new collector, Martha, some unusual foreign currency exchanges." But he knew he wasn't fooling her entirely. He couldn't tell her the truth, not yet. What truth? That he suspected a spy was operating out of his toy shop, using model trains and microscopes for God knows what sinister purpose. She'd think he'd finally lost his mind. Or worse, he'd put her in danger. His shop, once a sanctuary of innocence, now felt like a stage for a silent, unsettling play. He meticulously researched the items Mr. X purchased. The Class E4489 locomotive was indeed a highly detailed, functional model. The Messerschmitt Bf 109, with its retractable landing gear, wasn't just a toy plane. It was a perfect miniature replica, right down to the tiny, functional control surfaces. The microscope, too, was top of the line for its category. The Cold War wasn't some abstract concept to Frank. He'd fought against one totalitarian regime, and he understood the insidious nature of another. He listened to the news reports of McCarthyism, of Soviet expansion, of nuclear fears. But it was always out there. Now it was here, in his shop, in the hands of a man who paid for childhood dreams with ancient gold. Frank began his own, quiet reconnaissance. He started observing Mr. X more closely, not just during their brief, unsettling transactions, but the moments before and after. He'd step out for a smoke break, a habit he'd long since abandoned just as Mr. X was leaving. He watched where the man went. Down the street, always in the same direction, towards Washington Square Park. He never hailed a cab. He simply vanished into the stream of pedestrians. One crisp autumn afternoon, a few weeks after the Messerschmitt purchase, Mr. X returned. Frank felt the familiar prickle of adrenaline. This time, Mr. X was looking at the elaborate dollhouses. Not the brightly painted, whimsical ones, but a stately Victorian mansion kit, complete with tiny, intricate shingles and working miniature windows. "I require the Queen Anne dollhouse kit," Mr. X stated, his voice unchanging. "The one with the functional wiring for miniature lighting." Frank's breath hitched. Functional wiring. Again, the specific detail that elevated a toy to something more. He retrieved the large, heavy box. It was a magnificent kit designed for serious hobbyists, a weeks-long project for someone dedicated. "That will be $90, sir," Frank said, trying to keep his voice even. This was the most expensive purchase yet. Mr. X reached into his pouch. This time it was a gold Roman solidus, gleaming with the portrait of an emperor, its value easily double the asking price. Frank accepted it, his fingers brushing against Mr. X's. The contact was brief, cold. As he placed the coin in the safe, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was handling stolen goods, though he couldn't say by whom or from where. But this time Frank had a plan, while Mr. X was momentarily distracted. Adjusting his fedora before leaving, Frank made his move. He had a tiny jeweler's file hidden beneath the counter. With a practiced, almost invisible flick of his wrist, he made a minuscule, unique mark, a tiny notch on the bottom edge of the dollhouse kit's heavy cardboard box. It was so small, so precise, it would be utterly imperceptible to anyone not specifically looking for it, or to someone who wasn't the original marker. The door chimed. Mr. X was gone. Frank leaned against the counter, his heart hammering. He had done it. He had marked the package. Now what? Now he had to wait. Wait to see if the package would resurface. Wait to see if his wild theory held any weight, or if he was truly just a paranoid shopkeeper. Following days were a torment of anticipation. Frank considered going to the police, but what would he say? "Officer, a man keeps buying expensive toys with old gold coins and he says he wants discretion." They'd laugh him out of the precinct, or worse, dismiss his concerns as the ramblings of an overstressed businessman. He had no proof, only a gut feeling and a series of increasingly bizarre transactions. And the fear of putting his family, his shop, his very life at risk was a heavy burden. He confided in no one, not Martha, not his closest friends. The weight of this secret, this invisible war he was now a part of, pressed down on him. He felt isolated, alone in his knowledge. The Cold War, with its vast, shadowy networks of spies and counter-spies, seemed impossibly far from his small, well-lit shop. Yet it had found him. One evening after closing, Frank sat in his dimly lit office in the back, surrounded by stacks of inventory and the ghosts of countless childhood dreams. He pulled out his notes. The timeline of purchases, the types of items, the peculiar payment methods. The consistent, cold demeanor of Mr. X, it all pointed to one thing: this wasn't a hobby, this was an operation. The microscope for microdots. The German train, the German plane, perhaps specific models of military significance or blueprints disguised as schematics. And now, a dollhouse with functional wiring. What could a dollhouse be used for? A miniature safe. A hollowed-out compartment, a communication device. His mind raced. He had a vague recollection of newspaper reports about spy rings, about secrets smuggled in the most innocuous objects. His shop, his toys, were the perfect cover. Who would suspect a toy shop in Greenwich Village of being a hub for international espionage? It was brilliant in its simplicity, its audacity. The thought made him sick to his stomach. He, Frank, a simple toy shop owner, was an unwitting accomplice in what could be a direct threat to national security. He felt a sudden, profound shift. The fear hadn't vanished, but it was now tempered by a fierce sense of responsibility. He couldn't ignore this. He wouldn't. The decision solidified. He had to act. But how? He couldn't go to the local cops. He needed someone who understood the gravity of his suspicions, someone who dealt with the shadows. He started discreetly scanning the newspapers again, not for toy advertisements, but for anything, any clue about government agencies involved in national security. The FBI was the obvious choice, but how to approach them without sounding like a lunatic? He needed more than marked packages and gold coins. He needed a way to observe Mr. X in action, beyond the confines of his shop. Frank remembered the old war maxim, "Know your enemy." And he knew with a chilling certainty that Mr. X was an enemy, not just to him but to the very fabric of his country. His toy shop was no longer just a place of business, it was a front line. And Frank, the unassuming shopkeeper, was now a reluctant, solitary soldier in a silent war he never asked to join. The stakes were no longer just about his shop's reputation. They were about national security, about the fragile peace of the Cold War. He had to find out what Mr. X was doing, and he had to stop him. The question was, how could one ordinary man catch a ghost who paid in gold and dealt in secrets, all under the innocent guise of buying toys? The answer would lead him down a path far darker and more dangerous than any child's game. The question was no longer if, but how. Frank's toy shop, once a sanctuary of childhood dreams, had become a crucible for a desperate plan. He couldn't go to the local cops. They'd think he'd lost his marbles. He needed someone who understood the silent war, the invisible networks. But approaching the FBI, a faceless bureaucracy, felt like walking into a labyrinth blindfolded. He had gold coins, a few marked packages, and a gut feeling that screamed spy. Was that enough? His first attempt at real surveillance was clumsy, almost comically so. The morning after the dollhouse transaction, Frank ran an errand during Mr. X's usual afternoon visit window. He lurked across the street, pretending to examine a newspaper from a newsstand, his heart thumping like a drum solo. He saw Mr. X leave the shop, the large dollhouse kit box under his arm, walking with that same unhurried, almost spectral gait. Frank tried to follow, keeping a discreet distance. Discreet, it turned out, was not in his amateur repertoire. Mr. X was a ghost in motion, blending into the crowd with an unnerving ease. Frank, a solid, recognizable figure, found himself stumbling, jostling pedestrians, losing sight of his target in the blink of an eye. He chased after him, past the overflowing fruit stalls, through a knot of hurried businessmen, only to emerge on the other side of the street and find Mr. X gone. Vanished. It was as if the man had simply dematerialized. Frank returned to his shop, his face flushed, his breath ragged, a cold dread settling in his stomach. This wasn't a game. Mr. X was a professional. Following him was like trying to catch smoke. He needed a better plan, a more subtle approach. He needed to think like Mr. X, or at least like someone who anticipated Mr. X's movements. He pulled out his notes again. Dates, times, items. He marked the route Mr. X consistently took, down Bleecker Street, always towards Washington Square Park. The park. A busy, sprawling public space full of life, full of shadows. A perfect place for a professional to disappear, or to conduct business. Frank remembered the Minox camera he'd bought, the tiny marvel of German engineering. It was a perfect spy camera, small enough to hide in the palm of his hand or in his overcoat pocket. He practiced with it, learning its quirks, its focusing distance. He started taking lunch breaks in Washington Square Park, sitting on a bench pretending to read, but his eyes, sharp and watchful, were scanning, observing. He spent hours, days even, doing this. He learned the rhythms of the park, the chess players, the artists, the students, the young mothers with their prams. He noticed the street vendors, the buskers, the quiet corners where lovers met, and he waited. He felt foolish at times, a middle-aged toy shop owner playing detective. But the image of those gold coins, the unsettling blankness of Mr. X's face, kept him focused. Then it happened. Not on a Tuesday, not on a Thursday, but on a random Wednesday afternoon. Mr. X emerged from the shop, not with a dollhouse this time, but with a collection of intricately crafted lead soldiers, Napoleonic cavalry, ordered specifically by him a week prior. Frank had carefully marked the lead bases with a microscopic etching only visible under strong magnification. He waited for a few minutes, giving Mr. X a head start, then followed, keeping 2 blocks behind, using the cover of the bustling sidewalks. He saw Mr. X enter Washington Square Park, heading towards a specific, secluded bench near a large oak tree. It was the same tree Frank had noticed before, a natural landmark in the otherwise open space. Mr. X sat down, placing his briefcase and the package of lead soldiers beside him. He didn't look around. He didn't check his watch. He just sat, still as a statue, almost invisible amidst the vibrant life of the park. Frank found a bench diagonally opposite, partially obscured by a stand of bushes. He pulled out his newspaper, the tiny Minox camera hidden within its folds. He held his breath. A few minutes later, a young man, nondescript in a student-like tweed jacket, walked past Mr. X's bench. He didn't stop. He didn't look at Mr. X, but as he passed, his hand brushed against the bench. And in that fleeting moment, Mr. X's hand almost imperceptibly moved. The lead soldiers, they were gone. The young man continued walking, his pace unchanged, melting into the crowd. Frank felt a jolt of ice-cold realization. It was a dead drop. Not a literal drop, but an exchange so smooth, so practiced, it was almost invisible. The lead soldiers, those innocent-looking toys, had just changed hands. They were the container, but for what? Frank tried to get a picture. His hands were shaking. He fumbled with the Minox, the shutter clicking softly, almost silently. He wasn't sure if he'd caught anything useful. The young man was already disappearing. Mr. X sat for another minute, then slowly rose, picked up his briefcase and walked out of the park, heading in a different direction this time. He was gone. The entire exchange had taken less than 30 seconds. Back in his back office, Frank carefully developed the film from his Minox camera. The process was agonizingly slow, each minute feeling like an hour. He used a makeshift darkroom in a small, dusty storage closet, the faint chemical smell filling his nostrils, a stark contrast to the comforting sense of wood and plastic from the shop floor. He was an amateur, reliant on vague memories of photography clubs from his youth. The negatives emerged, tiny and delicate. He held them up to the light, squinting, blurry, out of focus. His hands had been shaking too much. He almost despaired. But then on one frame, a flicker of clarity. It was a shot of Mr. X on the bench. Not perfect, but recognizable. And more importantly, in the background, out of focus but still discernible, was the young man in the tweed jacket, his back to the camera, walking away. On the bench beside Mr. X, the package of lead soldiers was distinctly absent. It wasn't conclusive proof of an exchange, but it was powerful circumstantial evidence of a meeting and a vanished package. Frank developed another frame. This one was even more chilling. It was a close-up, surprisingly sharp, of Mr. X's hands on the bench, just moments after the exchange. In his open palm, barely visible, was a tiny, almost microscopic piece of paper, a microdot. Frank didn't need a microscope to know what he was seeing. His initial, dismissed thought now slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. The microdot viewing kit. The request that had seemed so outlandish, so out of place. It was all real. It was all connected. He printed a few copies of the clearest shots, careful to make them as crisp as possible. He also collected the gold and silver coins, meticulously labeled with the dates of transaction and the corresponding items purchased. He even tried to use a strong magnifying glass to find the minute etching he'd made on the base of one of the lead soldiers, and after a painstaking search, he found it. It was proof, at least to himself, that these weren't just random, innocent toys. Now, with something tangible beyond his gut feeling, he felt a surge of cold resolve. He couldn't go to the local police. This was bigger than a missing package or a suspicious transaction. This was espionage. This was the Cold War brought to his doorstep. He needed the FBI. But how? He couldn't just walk into a federal building and declare he'd caught a spy. He'd be dismissed, laughed out, or worse, put on some kind of watch list himself. He needed a way in, a contact. He racked his brain. During the war, he'd had a fleeting acquaintance with a young man, a sharp, serious type who had joined some kind of intelligence unit. Agent Miller, he thought his name was. He'd been a junior officer, brilliant but slightly too earnest for the casual banter of the mess hall. Frank remembered hearing he'd gone on to work for the government after the war, vaguely implying something in the intelligence sector. It was a long shot, a thread thinner than a spider's silk. He started making discreet inquiries. Not direct, no, that would be too risky. He called an old army buddy who worked in government contracting, casually mentioning his search for a Mr. Miller from their old unit. It took a few days, a few more phone calls, some vague excuses about a reunion. Finally, he got a number, a direct line, to a federal building in Washington, D.C. The man on the other end identified himself as Agent Samuel Miller. Frank took a deep breath. Agent Miller. My name is Frank Davis. We served together in Europe. I own a toy shop in New York. I have something urgent to discuss with you, something I believe concerns national security. There was a long silence on the other end, punctuated only by the faint crackle of the telephone line. Frank could almost feel the skepticism emanating from the receiver. Mr. Davis, Agent Miller finally said, his voice clipped, professional. I'm a very busy man. If this is about a faulty toy or a lost package, I suggest you contact local law enforcement. It's not about faulty toys, Agent Miller, Frank retorted, a sudden flash of anger cutting through his fear. It's about a Soviet spy operating out of my toy shop, and I have proof. Another silence, this one longer, more calculating. Soviet spy. Miller's voice was devoid of emotion. Mr. Davis, that's a very serious accusation. You'd better have more than a hunch. I have gold coins, historical artifacts, microdot photos, and a very precise pattern of suspicious behavior, Frank stated, his voice gaining strength, conviction. And I have a marked package that was exchanged in Washington Square Park less than 24 hours ago. Stay where you are, Mr. Davis, Miller said, his tone shifting, becoming sharper, more urgent. Don't speak to anyone, don't touch anything, we'll be in touch. The wait was agonizing. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking presence. Every unexpected noise sent a jolt of adrenaline through Frank. He kept the shop running, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but his eyes were constantly scanning, his ears alert. He felt exposed, vulnerable. He had tossed a stone into a deep, dark pond, and now he waited for the ripples to reach him. Less than 24 hours after his phone call, two men in dark suits, their faces grim and unsmiling, walked into Frank's fine toys. They didn't announce themselves, didn't flash badges. They simply walked to the counter, their gazes sweeping the shop with a professional coolness that spoke volumes. Frank knew instantly. Mr. Davis. One of them asked, his voice low, his eyes the color of steel. I'm Agent Miller. This is Agent Peterson. Frank swallowed, his mouth suddenly dry. Yes, Agent Miller, welcome. He gestured vaguely towards his back office. Perhaps we should speak in private. In the cramped, cluttered office, surrounded by ledgers and dusty boxes of old stock, Frank laid out his story. He presented the coins first, the Roman solidus, the German thaler, the ancient gold and silver. Miller and Peterson examined them with gloved hands, their expressions unreadable. These are genuine, Miller stated, his voice flat, and extremely valuable. Where did you get them, Mr. Davis? From a customer, Frank replied, his voice steadier than he expected. A man I call Mr. X. He pays for his purchases exclusively with these historical artifacts. Next, Frank produced the grainy photographs. He pointed to the blurry figure of Mr. X, then the missing package, then with a trembling finger, the minute microdot in his palm. Miller took the photos, pulling a magnifying glass from his inner jacket pocket. His brow furrowed as he studied the images. Peterson, meanwhile, was already carefully unwrapping the marked lead soldiers, meticulously examining their bases under a small, powerful light. He found Frank's minuscule etching. The microdot is concerning, Miller admitted, his gaze intense on Frank. And the exchange pattern fits known Soviet methods. The payment system is unusual but not unheard of for deeply embedded assets with long-term funding. Your description of the individual, his demeanor, it's all textbook. He paused, looking Frank directly in the eye. But you understand, Mr. Davis, that this is still largely circumstantial. We're talking about accusing a foreign power of espionage. We need hard evidence. We need to catch this man in the act or trace his network. I understand, Frank said, a new resolve hardening his voice. That's why I called you. Miller leaned back in his chair, a slight sigh escaping him. Mr. Davis, you've put yourself in incredible danger. You've been observing a trained operative. If he's a Soviet spy, he's exceptionally good at what he does. The fact that you've noticed him, let alone followed him and taken pictures, suggests either you're remarkably perceptive or he's getting sloppy. I'm inclined to believe the former. However, it also means you've placed yourself squarely on his radar, whether you know it or not. Frank felt a fresh wave of fear, cold and sharp. He knows. Miller's expression was grim. Highly likely. These men are trained to notice the slightest deviation, the smallest change in pattern. Your lunch breaks in the park, your sudden interest in photography. He would have picked up on it. Or he will very soon. Which is why we need to act carefully and quickly. What do you need me to do? Frank asked, his voice firm. There was no going back now. We need you to continue your normal routine, Miller instructed, his voice now a calm, authoritative command. Mr. X must not suspect we are involved. You are his contact point, his cutout in this system, whether you realize it or not. He trusts your shop as a safe conduit. We need to exploit that trust. We need to use your shop as bait. Frank's stomach churned. Bait, he was bait. We want you to maintain contact with him, Miller continued. The next time he comes in, you sell him what he wants as usual, but we will be watching and listening. He gestured towards a discreet corner of the office. We're going to set up surveillance, tiny microphones, cameras. We need to record the transactions, the conversations, the items. We need to see where he goes, who he meets after he leaves your shop. It's risky, Frank said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. Extremely, Miller agreed, his eyes never leaving Frank's. For all of us, but especially for you. If Mr. X suspects, your life could be in grave danger. You are now an active participant in a classified federal investigation. Your cooperation is paramount. Your silence is vital. You cannot tell anyone about this. Not your wife, not your closest friend. No one. Is that understood? Frank thought of Martha, her worried questions, her kind face. He thought of the quiet life they had built together. It was all about to be consumed by the dark machinery of the Cold War. But he also thought of the microdot, the insidious nature of the spy's work, the threat it posed to the country he had fought for. He nodded slowly. Understood. Good, Miller said, a flicker of something almost like respect in his eyes. We'll have a team here by morning. They'll be discreet. You won't even know they're here. Just act normal. Keep your eyes open. And if you see anything at all out of the ordinary, you call this number. He handed Frank a small, folded piece of paper with a single, 7-digit number. This is a direct, secure line. Don't use your regular phone. Peterson finished his examination of the lead soldiers and placed them back in their box. We'll be taking these and the coins for further analysis, Mr. Davis, he stated. Consider them evidence. The next few days were a blur of heightened senses and constant anxiety for Frank. Agent Miller's team moved with ghost-like efficiency. Small, almost invisible pinprick cameras appeared in the ceiling, no larger than a pencil eraser. Tiny microphones were embedded in the walls, under the counter, even within some of the larger, unused display models. Frank was given a discreet earpiece and a tiny transmitter to wear, a direct line to Miller, who was always nearby, watching from a surveillance van parked a block away. The shop, once his sanctuary, now felt like a stage. Every customer was a potential observer, every casual glance a possible sign of suspicion. He had to maintain his routine, greet customers with his usual warmth, discuss the merits of a new German train set, or explain the mechanics of a wind-up toy. But beneath the surface, Frank was a coiled spring, his every nerve alert, waiting. He found himself looking at his own shop through a new lens, the lens of surveillance. He noticed the blind spots, the angles, the ebb and flow of street traffic outside. He mentally rehearsed scenarios, what he would do if Mr. X did something unexpected, if the signal went dead, if he was discovered. The weight of secrecy was immense, especially with Martha. He avoided her questions, offering vague excuses about new inventory or paperwork. He saw the worry in her eyes, the growing distance between them, and it tore at him. But he couldn't break his silence. He couldn't risk her safety. Then, on a Friday afternoon, the bell chimed. Frank's heart leaped into his throat. It was Mr. X's same dark overcoat, same fedora pulled low, same worn briefcase. But as he stepped inside, Frank noticed a subtle difference. A tension in the man's shoulders, a fractional hesitation before his eyes swept the shop. It wasn't the blank assessment Frank had grown accustomed to. It was a deeper, more probing scan. "Good afternoon, sir," Frank said, his voice miraculously steady. He felt Miller's voice soft in his earpiece. "Stay calm, Frank, just like any other customer." Mr. X walked directly to the display of model ships. He pointed to a meticulously crafted U-boat, a German submarine model. "The type VII U-boat," he stated, his voice flat as ever, but Frank could detect a minute, almost imperceptible hardness in it. The 1/72 scale model with the internal ballast tanks. Again, the specificity. The internal ballast tanks, a complex feature, indicating a functional, not just aesthetic interest. Frank retrieved the model. It was a beautiful piece, designed for serious enthusiasts. As he placed it on the counter, he felt the familiar brush of Mr. X's hand. This time it lingered for a fraction of a second too long. A deliberate contact, or just Frank's heightened paranoia. "That will be $75, sir," Frank announced. Mr. X reached into his pouch. This time it was a gold Byzantine coin, an exquisitely detailed piece depicting an emperor and an angel. Frank took it, his fingers brushing Mr. X's again. Their eyes met. And for the first time, Frank saw something in Mr. X's pale blue eyes. Not blankness, not coldness, but a spark. A flicker of recognition or perhaps suspicion. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, but Frank felt it like a jolt of electricity. Mr. X knew, or he suspected. "Did you get that, Miller?" Frank thought, his hand trembling slightly as he put the coin in the register. Loud and clear, Frank. "Hold your ground. He's testing you." Miller's voice in his ear was calm, but Frank could sense the underlying tension. Mr. X didn't leave immediately. He lingered, his gaze sweeping the shop once more, slower this time. It settled on the newly installed light fixture above the counter, a perfectly innocent, standard fluorescent tube that had replaced an older, flickering incandescent bulb. Frank knew a tiny camera was embedded within its housing. A chilling thought struck Frank. The light fixture had been replaced after Mr. X's previous visit. A new detail in a familiar environment. A change in the pattern. Mr. X's lips curled into something that might have been a ghost of a smile or a grimace. "Your shop seems brighter, Mr. Davis," he said, his voice still flat but with an unsettling undertone. "A welcome improvement." Frank felt a bead of sweat trickle down his spine. "Just keeping up with the times, sir," he replied, trying to sound nonchalant. Mr. X nodded slowly, his gaze still on the light fixture. Indeed, progress, as they say, marches on, even in the quaint corners of the city. He paused, then picked up his package. "Until next time, Mr. Davis." "He knows, Frank," Miller's voice crackled in his ear the moment the shop door closed. The light fixture, classic tell, he saw the change. Frank leaned against the counter, his knees weak. "What now?" he whispered. "Do we arrest him?" "Not yet," Miller replied, his voice firm. "We need to know more. Arresting him now gets us one operative, but it doesn't give us the network, the intelligence he's passing, or who he's passing it to. He's a dead end if we pick him up now. This just means we have to be smarter. And you, Frank, have to be even more careful." The FBI team swarmed in after hours, a silent, efficient army of technicians and agents. They replaced the compromised light fixture with an identical, clean one. They checked all the bugs, added new ones in less obvious places. They debriefed Frank for hours, going over every micro-expression, every word Mr. X had uttered. "His comment about progress marching on, Frank," Miller said, pacing Frank's office. "That's a direct taunt. He's letting you know he's onto you, onto us. This isn't just about collecting intelligence anymore. It's about a game of wits. And now you're a player, Frank, a crucial one." "So what's the next move?" Frank asked, exhaustion etched on his face. "We lure him back," Miller said, a steely glint in his eye. "He thinks he has the upper hand, that he's exposed our surveillance. He'll want to test you again, to confirm his suspicions, or perhaps to pass a final, critical piece of intelligence before he disappears. We need to create an opportunity for him to do just that, while giving us the chance to uncover his network." The plan was meticulously crafted, risky, and centered entirely around Frank. The FBI had already identified the young man in the tweed jacket from the blurred photographs as a suspected lower-level courier, a bagman. They also had intelligence suggesting a high-value meeting was imminent, a critical information exchange likely involving Mr. X, the next item he asks for, Miller explained, leaning over a diagram of Frank's shop. "Whatever it is, we need to know what he does with it. Is it another container for microdots, or is it a component for something else?" We believe he might be using your shop as a postal box for a larger operation, a drop-off point for something that then gets picked up by someone else or assembled elsewhere. Frank was to play his role perfectly. He had to be calm, collected, unfazed by Mr. X's veiled threats. He was instructed to subtly encourage Mr. X to purchase something that could serve as a potential dead drop item, a large item that would require Mr. X to perhaps carry it with two hands or place it down for a moment. This would provide the FBI with critical observation time and camera angles. We want him to feel secure enough to make a mistake, Miller said. He's good, Frank, but even the best make mistakes when they're playing cat and mouse. He's going to assume we'll be waiting for him, watching every step he takes from your shop. He might try a new route, a new exchange point, and that's where we catch him. We'll have teams covering every exit from the park, every major intersection leading away from your shop. The real danger, Miller emphasized, was what Mr. X might do if he felt truly cornered. These were men trained for extreme situations, capable of desperate measures. Frank was told to carry no weapons, to make no sudden moves, to engage in no confrontation. His job was to be the unassuming shopkeeper, the innocent facilitator. "You're our eyes and ears inside, Frank," Miller concluded, his hand resting briefly on Frank's shoulder. "What you've already done is extraordinary. What you're about to do, it takes a special kind of courage." Frank nodded, a knot of dread and grim determination tightening in his gut. He was scared, more scared than he had been even in the war. Then the enemy wore a uniform, the battle lines were clear. Here the enemy was faceless, the war silent, fought in the unassuming aisles of his toy shop, paid for with ancient gold and threatening to tear his ordinary life apart. He was a toy shop owner, caught in a spy's game, and he was about to play his most dangerous hand. The next time the bell above Frank's fine toys chimed, it wouldn't just signal a customer's arrival. It would be the start of a silent war's most critical battle, one that Frank had to win, not just for his country, but for the chance to reclaim his life, his peace, and the innocence he had once sold in small wooden boxes. The silence in Frank's fine toys was no longer peaceful. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. After Mr. X's departure, Frank felt the weight of that brighter comment settle on him like a physical burden. He knew Mr. X was aware. He was onto them. The game had not only escalated, it had become deeply personal. Miller's voice in his ear was a constant, low thrum, a link to the unseen world of federal agents that now permeated every corner of his once innocent shop. The FBI's tactical shifts were immediate and precise. The obvious surveillance points were removed or disguised even further. The cameras in the new light fixture were gone, replaced by even smaller, almost microscopic lenses embedded in the wood grain of the ceiling beams, disguised as knots. Microphones were now sewn into the seams of old teddy bears on the shelves, hidden within the delicate clockwork of musical boxes. Frank was given a new earpiece, smaller, almost invisible, and his transmitter was now a button on the inside of his jacket lapel. He was instructed to casually touch it if he needed to speak, making it appear as if he was merely adjusting his clothing. Miller explained the new strategy. "He's going to be looking for us, Frank. He'll sweep the shop. He'll look for changes. We have to be invisible. Our best bet is to make him think he's outsmarted us, that he's still operating in the clear. He'll be overly cautious, which might make him take risks he wouldn't otherwise. We need him to feel confident, but not so confident he doesn't come back." The psychological toll on Frank was immense. He slept fitfully, dreams filled with pale blue eyes and ancient gold coins. He caught himself staring into space, replaying snippets of conversation, searching for hidden meanings. Martha noticed his increasing pallor, his lost appetite. "Frank, you're working too hard," she'd say, her voice laced with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." He could only offer a weak smile, another evasion, another lie that chipped away at his conscience. The love and trust they shared, the bedrock of his life, was now strained by this clandestine burden. He felt a constant, gnawing guilt, yet the stakes were too high to betray the secret. Miller had also briefed him on the specific scenario for the next encounter. "He'll test you, Frank. He might try to engage you in conversation, ask questions designed to trip you up, to see if your demeanor has changed. He might even make a veiled threat. You have to be the same Frank, the friendly, unassuming toy shop owner. But underneath, you need to be steel. No reaction, no fear, just sell him his toys." They also prepped him on an item of interest. The FBI suspected Mr. X was not just transmitting information, but also receiving it, or even assembling components for something larger. They had identified a potential item in Frank's inventory that, if requested by Mr. X, could be used to confirm their theories about a particular type of espionage device. It was a large, elaborate model of a classic American steam locomotive, the Big Boy, a highly detailed, functional replica, complete with working lights and a smoke generator. Its intricate internal mechanisms and ample hollow spaces made it a perfect candidate for concealing components or housing a complex mechanism. Frank spent hours studying the Big Boy, familiarizing himself with its every rivet, every screw. He was no longer just a salesman. He was an actor, playing the role of his life, with national security hanging in the balance. Every passing hour was a slow burn of anticipation, a tightening coil of dread and determination. He understood the danger. He understood that his life, and perhaps Martha's, was on the line. But he also understood that he was the only one who could do this. He was the only thread connecting the world of innocent toys to the brutal reality of Cold War espionage. He was the bait, and he had to be convincing. 3 days later, the bell chimed. Frank's blood ran cold, then surged with a jolt of adrenaline. It was HIM, Mr. X looking precisely as he always did, unremarkable and unreadable. He stepped into the shop, his gaze sweeping the room, slow and deliberate, a predator scenting the air. Frank stood behind the counter, forcing a practiced smile onto his face, his heart hammering against his ribs. "He's here. Remember the drill, Frank," Miller's voice whispered in his ear, calm and steady. Mr. X walked directly to the display where the American model locomotive stood. Frank watched, his breath held. Would it be the Big Boy, the one the FBI was so interested in? Mr. X's pale eyes lingered on the intricate details of the miniature engine, its brass fittings gleaming under the shop lights. "The Union Pacific Big Boy," Mr. X stated, his voice flat, but Frank detected a faint, almost imperceptible note of something new, a flicker of something close to triumph. "The articulated steam locomotive, model number 4014. I believe it comes with a sound synthesizer for authentic steam effects and a working smoke unit." Frank almost gasped. It was the Big Boy, the very one the FBI had identified. "Yes, sir, it does," Frank replied, his voice coming out a little huskier than he intended. He cleared his throat. "An exceptional piece of engineering, that one, very popular with serious collectors." He retrieved the large, heavy box from the display, its weight feeling immense in his hands. As Frank placed the box on the counter, Mr. X leaned in slightly, his gaze piercing. "Indeed," he murmured, "the ingenuity of American engineering is often surprising, one might even say revolutionary." His pale eyes met Frank's, and in that fleeting moment Frank saw it again, the knowing glint, the subtle acknowledgement that the game was on and that Mr. X was enjoying it. He was not just making a purchase, he was sending a message. "It will be $150, sir," Frank stated, the price higher than previous items, reflecting the Big Boy's complexity and size. Mr. X reached into his worn leather pouch. This time he didn't produce gold or silver coins. He pulled out a single, neatly folded, heavy paper packet. He laid it on the counter. "I believe this will suffice," he said, his voice unwavering. Frank looked at the packet. It was clearly marked, printed in a distinct, unfamiliar Cyrillic script. He recognized it immediately from the FBI briefing. This was not a monetary payment. This was a dead drop instruction, a prearranged signal, or perhaps a coded message. It was the real currency of espionage. "Do not open it, Frank. Just act like it's currency. Confirm the amount, but don't dwell on the script. Just accept it," Miller's urgent voice commanded in his ear. Frank picked up the packet, his fingers brushing the thick, unfamiliar paper. He feigned counting, a quick, almost automatic gesture of a shopkeeper handling money. "Yes, sir, that will be just fine," he said, forcing a smile that felt brittle. He put the packet into the cash register, sliding it into a separate compartment with a practiced ease. "Excellent," Mr. X said, his voice laced with an almost imperceptible hint of satisfaction. He picked up the heavy box containing the big boy, but instead of leaving directly, he paused. He looked around the shop, a slow, methodical sweep. His gaze lingered on a row of innocuous-looking toy cars. Then he looked directly at Frank. "You know, Mr. Davis," Mr. X began, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "I've always admired your dedication to your craft, to the preservation of innocence. It's a rare quality in these turbulent times." He took a single step closer to the counter, his pale eyes holding Frank's. But innocence, like everything else, can be a fragile thing, easily corrupted, easily broken. One must be very careful, Mr. Davis, with what one chooses to protect, and how. The words hung in the air, a cold, unmistakable warning. It was a direct threat cloaked in pleasantries. Mr. X knew. He knew Frank was involved, and he was letting him know the consequences. Frank felt a cold dread seize him, but he held Mr. X's gaze unwavering. He remembered Miller's words, "No fear." Mr. X gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and walked towards the door, the large box of the big boy held securely under his arm. The bell chimed, a sound that now resonated with an ominous finality. He was gone. Frank was left standing behind the counter, heart pounding, the weight of Mr. X's words echoing in the sudden, deafening silence. The game was no longer about discovery, it was about survival. The moment the bell stopped swaying, Miller's voice was back, sharp and urgent. "He knows, Frank, that was a direct threat. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Frank muttered, though his hands were trembling. "What was in the packet?" "We'll analyze it later. Right now our focus is on him. He's taking the big boy, that's our opportunity. Peterson and his team are on him. Your part of the operation is complete, Frank. Stay put. Do not follow him." But Frank couldn't just stay put. Not after that. Not after the veiled threats. He had to know. He had to see. He had been bait, but now, fueled by a surge of defiance and a desperate need for answers, he was determined to see the trap sprung. Ignoring Miller's direct order, he quickly grabbed his overcoat, a hat, and slipped out the back door, merging into the alleyway behind his shop. He knew the shortcuts, the narrow passages, the quiet streets that offered parallel paths to Mr. X's usual route towards Washington Square Park. He kept his distance, a ghost in the shadows, navigating the familiar labyrinth of Greenwich Village. He saw Mr. X about a block ahead, the large box under his arm, his unhurried pace unchanged. As he entered Washington Square Park, Mr. X took a detour from his usual bench. Instead, he headed towards a less conspicuous spot, a cluster of overgrown bushes near an unused service gate. Frank moved silently, using the trees and newspaper kiosks as cover. He saw Mr. X stop by a thick hedge. He placed the large big boy box on the ground, leaning it against the wall near the gate. Then, with a practiced, almost invisible motion, he reached into the box. He didn't pull out the train. Instead, he seemed to be manipulating something inside the box, near the top. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the bushes, a man Frank recognized as the courier from the previous exchange, the young man in the tweed jacket. But this time, he wasn't just walking by. He approached Mr. X directly. Their exchange was swift, silent, almost a choreographed dance. The courier leaned down, ostensibly to help Mr. X with the box, but in that brief moment his hand dipped into the big boy's packaging. He retrieved a small, dark object, not the microdot this time, something else, something more substantial. Frank squinted, trying to make out the object. It looked like a small, flat device, no bigger than a matchbox with a tiny antenna, a miniaturized radio transmitter, a burst encoder. His heart pounded. This wasn't just information exchange, this was technology hardware. Before Frank could process what he was seeing, the park erupted. "Freeze, FBI." Agents, seemingly appearing from nowhere, swarmed the area. They had been there all along, disguised as joggers, park-goers, street artists. Two agents tackled the courier, securing the small device from his hand. Mr. X, however, was a different challenge. Even as agents moved in, he moved with a sudden, shocking speed. He didn't run. Instead, he twisted, dropping the big boy box, and plunged his hand into his overcoat. Frank's blood ran cold. Was he reaching for a weapon? Gun, gun. An agent shouted. Before Mr. X could fully withdraw whatever he was holding, an agent lunged, tackling him to the ground. A struggle ensued. Frank, frozen, watched as the agents wrestled Mr. X, securing him. It was over in a matter of seconds. The entire park, moments before a scene of quiet tranquility, was now a tableau of motion and shouted commands. Miller appeared beside Frank, his face grim. "I told you to stay put, Frank." There was no anger, just a weary admonishment. "You could have been killed." Frank could only stare at the scene, the crumpled big boy box, the captured figures. What was he reaching for? Miller led him slowly towards the secured area. "A cyanide capsule, Frank." Standard operating procedure for high-value assets. He was prepared to take his own life rather than be interrogated. Frank felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just a game, this was deadly serious. He looked at Mr. X, now cuffed and being led away, his face still unreadable but with a new, bitter resignation in his pale eyes. The courier, too, was being secured. What was that device? Frank asked, pointing to the small object one of the agents was carefully placing into an evidence bag. Miller nodded towards it. "That, Frank, is a highly advanced, miniaturized burst transmitter. It allows for the transmission of coded messages in fractions of a second, almost undetectable. The big boy," he gestured to the crumpled box, "was modified. The smoke unit was replaced with a power source, and the sound synthesizer with a complex internal mechanism, a one-time pad encryption device designed to encode and transmit the burst messages. It was a sophisticated, mobile dead drop. He wasn't just passing microdots. He was building and deploying operational intelligence platforms." Frank looked at the big boy, lying broken on the ground, its innocent facade shattered. The complex, beautiful toy, once a symbol of American ingenuity, had been perverted into a tool of espionage, a silent weapon in a hidden war. The depth of the deception, the cold calculation, hit him with a profound force. His shop, his life, had been completely infiltrated. The immediate aftermath was a blur of FBI activity. Forensic teams meticulously scoured the area, collecting every scrap of evidence. Frank was taken to a secure location for several hours, debriefed by a team of specialists. He recounted every detail, every observation, every veiled word. He learned that Mr. X, whose real name was eventually revealed as Alexei Volkov, was a highly skilled GRU, Soviet military intelligence officer, deeply embedded, operating under a decades-long cover. His purchases in Frank's shop weren't just for current operations. They were part of a long-term strategy, building a network of assets and communication channels. The microdot viewing kit was indeed for examining crucial intelligence on microfilm. The German models, the train, the plane, the U-boat, were not just containers. They were used as secure, untraceable components for various intelligence devices, their intricate engineering providing perfect camouflage. The U-boat model, for instance, had housed a device designed to intercept naval communications. The ancient coins were part of a vast, meticulously managed fund of untraceable assets, accumulated over generations, used to fund long-term deep-cover agents like Volkov. The big boy locomotive was the latest and most dangerous piece of his operation. It was designed to be a mobile, short-range burst transmission unit, capable of sending encrypted messages from various urban locations, making it incredibly difficult to pinpoint the source. The target of this intelligence, Frank later learned, was highly sensitive information regarding American military movements in Europe, specifically related to NATO's early warning systems. The information, if successfully transmitted, could have severely compromised Western defenses at a critical juncture of the Cold War. Volkov's network, Frank discovered, was far more extensive than he could have imagined. The young man in the tweed jacket was just one of several couriers, all seemingly innocuous students or artists, who would collect or deliver specific components from other drops across the city. Frank's shop had unknowingly served as a crucial node, a manufacturing and distribution center for a complex espionage apparatus.